Something happened in Islamabad that no mainstream outlet is explaining properly. Iran walked into a room with American negotiators, and instead of sitting down to talk, they placed a list of demands on the table, folded their hands, and waited. Not proposals, not talking points, demands, and the American side didn't walk out. They stayed, they listened, and that single moment tells you more about who actually won this conflict than any press release ever will. This is what happened, and this is why it matters to you, no matter where you're sitting right now. Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister Kazem Garibabadi opened the session with a statement that left no room for interpretation. This delegation did not come to negotiate, it came to present terms. That distinction is not semantics, it is everything. When a country arrives at a table and announces it will not exchange concessions, that it will only present terms, that country is operating from a position of perceived victory. It is behaving the way a nation behaves when it believes the war is already over and it already won. The demands themselves confirm the posture. Full Iranian authority over the Strait of Hormuz, complete war reparations, the unfreezing of every blocked Iranian financial asset, a permanent regional ceasefire, and long-term security guarantees, not just for Iran itself, but for every proxy network it maintains across the Middle East. Hezbollah, the Houthis, all of them covered under a single American guarantee. Iran's official government accounts posted the announcement in capital letters. This discussion is centered on our demands. They followed it with a second post, time to seal the victory, in beautiful Islamabad. Read that again. Victory, not settlement, not agreement. Victory. That is the language of a nation that does not believe it lost. That is the language of a country that watched its cities absorb military strikes, watched senior commanders get killed, watched its navy and air defenses get degraded, and still walked into Pakistan wearing that word like a badge. And the question you have to ask yourself is simple. Is that a bluff or is it a calculation? Because if it's a calculation, if Tehran genuinely believes the geopolitical math has shifted in its favor, then what you're watching right now is not a peace process. It's a term-setting exercise. And America is sitting at the receiving end of it. Now compare that energy to what was coming out of the White House at the exact same moment. Trump posted publicly that morning his exact words, "Iran is losing and losing big." He followed it with a mocking reference invoking the deaths of Iranian leaders. And his own negotiating team, the people he sent, were sitting in that room face to face with Iran's foreign minister and the speaker of Iran's parliament at the precise moment those posts went live. Let that sink in. Your president is online calling your enemy a loser and mocking their religion, while your own people are across a table trying to get those same people to sign an agreement. This is not psychological pressure applied with strategic precision. Psychological pressure is calibrated. It creates leverage without burning the room. What Trump did created incoherence. It handed Iran's delegation a ready-made excuse to walk out and a ready-made narrative if they did. The Americans aren't serious, and they never were. The fact that Iran's team stayed anyway, that tells you they want something from this process, but it also tells you they don't need it. Because a delegation that needed the deal would have used that moment to demand a public apology, or at minimum a retraction. Iran's team didn't even flinch publicly. They posted about victory and kept talking. That is not the behavior of a party under pressure. That is the behavior of a party that is already getting what it wants. Then came the Strait of Hormuz incident, and this is where the two narratives split completely apart. A senior American official told an Axios reporter that several U.S. Navy destroyers transited the strait, east to west and back, completely unimpeded. No Iranian contact, no confrontation, no issue. Iran's Tasnim news agency and the foreign ministry spokesperson told a completely different story. According to Tehran, a U.S. destroyer approached the strait, received a direct warning from Iran's armed forces, and turned back. Iran's foreign minister, mid-negotiation, sitting across from the Pakistani prime minister, paused the session to inform Islamabad that the vessel was approaching. He stated clearly, if it does not retreat, this delegation walks out. The destroyer turned around. Two accounts, directly contradicting each other. Both cannot be true. Here is how you figure out which one to believe. Not through ideology, not through which side you prefer, but through behavioral evidence. Iran announced the standoff publicly, with specifics, through official government channels. The American account came through an anonymous official who leaked to a single journalist. Which of those two behaviors matches a side that feels confident in its position? Governments that win confrontations announce them. Governments that want those confrontations to disappear send anonymous officials to reporters. The behavioral pattern here points in one direction, and it matches every other behavioral signal coming out of Islamabad. Here is a fact that almost no one in Western media is talking about, and it is arguably the most structurally important thing happening inside these negotiations. Look at who Iran sent. Roughly a dozen of their most senior technical and diplomatic officials, people with PhDs in nuclear physics and enrichment processes, people who have spent decades inside the architecture of Iran's regional security agreements, people who understand centrifuge design, uranium hexafluoride conversion, and weapons-grade enrichment thresholds at the level of working engineers, not policy briefings. Now look at who America sent. J.D. Vance, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner. Not a single person at that table holds substantive technical expertise in nuclear capability or enrichment technology. Not one. And here is why that matters right now, today, in ways that will compound for years. Both sides have described these talks as having moved into technical discussions on implementation. That phrase is where agreements actually get made or broken. Technical discussions are where the language gets precise, where enrichment pause means something specific in kilograms and centrifuge counts, where security guarantee requires a definition that holds up in international law. Iran's team can navigate that terrain in their sleep. They built the program. They understand every clause, every loophole, every precedent from the 2015 JCPOA and what broke it. The American team is operating from talking points, and this is not the first time. Witkoff and Kushner already botched the previous round of negotiations, a fact that is somehow not disqualifying enough to keep them out of the room for round two. Their presence in Islamabad is not an asset. It is a structural vulnerability that Iran's technical experts will exploit in every session that gets specific. Iran negotiates on home terrain in technical discussions. America does not. And that gap, invisible in the headlines, is decisive in the room. The third major failure unfolding simultaneously, and possibly the most revealing. The ceasefire framework that the Trump administration negotiated explicitly included Lebanon. That was Iran's stated condition for agreeing to protect its regional allies. The American side accepted that condition. Iran received that guarantee. In the 24 hours while these face-to-face talks were actively underway in Islamabad, while diplomats were in the building, while the press was outside, while both sides were publicly committed to the process, the Israeli Air Force carried out over 200 airstrikes on Hezbollah targets and infrastructure in southern Lebanon. Earlier that same week, strikes on Beirut killed between 200 and 250 people. Over 1,000 casualties reported in total. The Trump administration negotiated a ceasefire. One of its closest partners violated that ceasefire openly, repeatedly, and publicly while the negotiation was still in progress. Every single party sitting in that room in Islamabad watched that happen. Pakistan watched it. Iran watched it. The observers watched it. And every one of them drew the same conclusion, whether they said it out loud or not. An American guarantee is unenforceable, not because America doesn't have power, but because America cannot or will not use that power to constrain its own allies. And in international negotiation, a guarantee you cannot enforce is worth nothing. It is worse than nothing. It is a trap, because the party that accepts it has given up something real in exchange for a commitment that evaporates the moment it becomes inconvenient. Iran anticipated this. Their stated position, publicly through official channels, holds that you cannot negotiate in good faith with a party that lies about everything. That framing is strategic. It is not rhetoric for domestic consumption. It is Iran telling every observer in the room exactly why the demands came first and the process came second. Because the process, as history has shown, cannot be trusted to hold. Iran's logic is not emotional. It is structural. If the American side cannot enforce compliance from its own partners during active negotiations, then any agreement it signs is only as strong as American willingness to maintain it. And that willingness is clearly conditional. Extract maximum, verifiable, structural concessions up front. Don't trust the process. Take what you can take while the room is watching. The demands are not a negotiating opening position. They are the conclusion of a decade of watching American guarantees collapse. Something else is visible in Trump's public communications that deserves direct analysis because it reveals the domestic pressure driving the American side of these talks. Trump wrote this: America is clearing out the Strait of Hormuz as a favor to China, Japan, South Korea, France, and Germany. Weeks, the explicit message from the same administration was that America had no obligation to police international waterways for other countries' benefit. That was the position. No free rides for allies. American interests come first. Now it's a favor. Now empty tankers are rushing to America. Now Trump is monitoring fertilizer prices in the middle of active war negotiations. That whiplash in messaging from "we owe you nothing" to "you're welcome, we're clearing your shipping lanes" is not strategic repositioning. It is a president managing anxiety about economic consequences in real time and trying to frame those consequences as generosity. That is a deeply different thing from projecting strength. Strength at a negotiating table requires a coherent narrative. It requires your counterparts to believe that you know what you want, that your words on Monday will still be true on Thursday, and that the commitments you make will be honored. Every contradiction in Trump's public posts, every reversal, every mocking tweet fired into the room where his own people are sitting destroys that coherence one post at a time. Iran's team is watching every one of those posts. They have translators, they have analysts, they know what is being said in Washington while their delegation is in Islamabad, and every inconsistency is another data point confirming what they already believe. The American side is managing a domestic audience, not executing a foreign policy strategy. Those are not the same thing, and the difference matters enormously when you are trying to reach a deal that actually holds. Here is the honest assessment of where things stand. Not the version shaped by either government's preferred narrative, but the version that emerges when you look at observable behavior from both sides. Iran absorbed real military damage during this conflict. Its navy was degraded, air defense systems were weakened, senior figures were killed. The country absorbed those losses, and yet Iran walked into Pakistan, checked into its hotels, rode in Mercedes-Maybach motorcades, was received with full diplomatic ceremony, and successfully reframed this entire process not as a peace settlement between two parties of roughly equal standing, but as a term-setting exercise by a party that considers itself the victor. The United States simultaneously arrived without a single nuclear technical expert in the room, arrived with no allied support sitting beside it at the table, arrived managing an active ceasefire violation committed by its closest regional partner with no apparent ability to stop it, and was led by a president whose public social media posts were actively undermining his own team's credibility in real time. One side arrived believing it had won. The other side arrived managing a domestic audience and hoping the room wouldn't notice the gap between the public narrative and the reality. The room noticed. No amount of social media posting changes what that room actually contains. No framing from a White House press briefing changes what the delegates sitting across from each other could see with their own eyes. The session in Islamabad is not over. The outcome of these talks is not certain. Agreements can still be reached. Conditions can still shift. But the structure of power that showed up in that room, who walked in with confidence, who walked in with a knowledge gap whose guarantee had just been violated in real time, whose leader was posting mockery while his team was in the building, that structure does not lie. And if you are in the United States or the United Kingdom right now, watching your government frame this as a successful pressure campaign, this is the gap between what you're being told and what is actually happening. Pay attention to that gap. Because the next decision made inside that room will be made by the people who showed up prepared. And preparation is not something you fake.